Let's begin with your, not name, rank, and serial number, but name and...
I can give you all of them.
Your name, your place of birth, and your date of birth.
Well, my name is Raymond Vincent Gill, G-I-L-L. I was born of immigrants. I was the first of my family to be born this side of the Atlantic. My father was in the British Navy, and he came after the war and he had a job in a steel mill in Lorain, Ohio, which is up on Lake Erie near Cleveland. And I was born there. And
what year?
1926. 1926. And that makes me 78 right now.
What was your early schooling like?
Well, I like to believe that it was quite good, because I've compared myself and my education with those of other people throughout my life, and I think that I did quite well. It was a melting pot town. We had a shipyard there and a large steel mill and other industries as well. And we had what for that time was a pretty average growing up period. Actually, I grew up as a happy person. We didn't have very much money, never owned a car, never owned a house. But I didn't seem to know that I was deprived. Anyway, I think that we were carefully taught by good teachers, and well, that's about it.
How was high school?
High school, there was one high school in town and 4 junior high schools. And these 4 junior high schools each represented a different ethnic area. In those days, all the Italians lived in one part of town, the Polish lived in another part of town, and so forth. And sometimes when you walk through these neighborhoods, you'd hear the original language being spoken rather than English. And then all of these junior highs fed this senior high school. There were about 1,500 in the senior high school, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, and we also had part of the 9th grade from one of the junior high schools. We did all the things that people did in those days. We had the advantage of living on Lake Erie, and so we had this nice beach available to us at all times, and there was a lot of boating took place. And it was a one-street town, and it was not very much different from a lot of towns in those years.
Now, one event happened in your high school that was quite traumatic, though. And how did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I'm a musician. I still am a semi-pro musician, and I taught music. In school, I did everything musical. I was in the a cappella choir, I was in the band, I was in the orchestra, and I was in a little polka band called the Note Busters in junior high school. And we, about 4 of us took one of their father's car and went into Cleveland, which is 27 miles due east of us, to see the Jan Savitt Orchestra on the stage of the Palace Theater. You know, those are in the days when you went in to see a band, and they would present a show, and then they would go into the movie. They'd show the movie, sometimes a double feature, and then maybe a newsreel, and then they'd go back to a band performance again. So we went in to hear the famous Jan Savitt Orchestra, and they had a vocalist by the name of Bon Bon. After the show, we came out of the theater and went to the parking lot where the car was parked, and the attendant told us about Pearl Harbor. This was that Sunday, December 7th. And naturally, we were shocked and stunned to to hear the news, as everybody was. And of course, our first thought was, we're going to be in it. And we're going to try to be in it if they don't draft us, you know. The first thing was, in our minds was, we want to get into that fight.
So what happened next? How old were you, by the way?
17.
Okay. So what happened next?
Well, in high school, the government came around and told us that they were administering a test to find suitable people to enter their military training program called the Army Specialized Training Program. And this program developed people in various specialties for the services. So I took this test. I think it took all day, and I passed it. It was kind of a rigorous test, and so they shipped me to Purdue University in Indiana, and they started training me to be a mechanical engineer. My aptitude test showed that I would make a pretty good mechanical engineer, and so it was.
So what was Purdue like?
Well, it was a big, kind of impersonal place to me, you know. They housed us in a fraternity house, and we marched to classes every day. And they among other things, they had a full program, a full college program, plus 2 military subjects. One was in marching and that kind of stuff, and the other was in the military tactics and stuff.
So this was not basic training, though?
Oh, no.
Okay, all right.
Now, since I was only 17, they couldn't touch me for active duty.
Okay.
I had to be 18 to be on active duty, so I was in the reserve, in active reserve. And we had a sort of a make-believe artillery unit, and we learned something about how to fire artillery pieces and how to do close order drill. And we wore a derivative Army uniform.
But mainly this was a college. This was a
college.
Yeah.
These were all college courses. They took 16 weeks of the regular course, added the 2 military courses, and then telescoped it into 12 weeks. They shrank it into 12. And so we didn't have time for anything but studying.
Did you enjoy this period?
Did I enjoy it? Well, it was a big adventure to me, you know. I was having my own kind of fun with that, but I didn't have time for mischief or girls or anything like that. And the people in the group were fairly intelligent guys, you know. We were all sort of hand-picked, you might say. And so we started out this college course to be mechanical engineers. And it was hard. It really was difficult.
Did you know why? I mean, you took an aptitude test and they decided that's what you should do, but this was in anticipation of turning 18 and becoming in the military.
Yes.
So what would the mechanical engineering training be? What options would you have?
Well, you know, I didn't think that much farther beyond that.
That's what I figured.
I figured I was in their hands, and, you know, if they told me to do something, I'd say yes, sir, you know. But we were all in the same fix. And an interesting thing then happened. Things were getting kind of tough over in Normandy, and the invasion had begun, and they told us that they were going to break up the whole program and put us in the infantry, which was not a very choice piece of news, but they couldn't do it until we turned 18. So we had a family conference, and it was decided that my mother would come to Indiana and sign me out of the program until I turned 18. This is what we did. I completed 6 weeks there, Only 6 weeks. Well, that wasn't enough to get me any significant amount of college credits for after the war, and so I decided it was kind of more or less worthless. So we signed out of it. I went home to wait for my birthday.
I don't quite understand why your mother would sign you out at that point.
We figured it was wasted time, you know. Why should I stay? Oh, the Army said, we're going to keep you until the end of the semester in which you reach your 18th birthday, and then you'll go into active duty. Okay. So what we were doing was just treading water.
Yeah.
And waiting, and it seemed useless to us.
So it was better to spend the time with your family as opposed to, okay,
Precisely.
Now I get it, okay.
Yeah.
Your 18th birthday happens, what happened then?
The very next week to the day, I was called into active duty.
Where did you go?
They sent me to Fort Benjamin Harrison, also in Indiana, and to be inducted. And there, of course, they gave me all the shots, ran all the tests, and threw a bunch of uniform articles at me, and then they sent me to basic training.
Now things get interesting.
Oh yes. 17 weeks of basic.
Where was it?
Camp Wheeler, Georgia, near Macon.
Okay.
And it was in the depth of summertime by the time I got there. And it was in one of the hottest places in the world to be at that time of year. So it was an interesting experience.
Well, let's give us a visual of the camp itself. They're talking about barracks, right? There's barracks and areas that you're going to operate in.
Yeah.
How many people were you with in a barracks? About 30 maybe, or something like that?
45 or 46 of us.
And these are people from all over the country?
All over the country, yes. Actually, we were overcrowded in there. They had cots set up in the aisleways and everything.
Wow.
There were 4 squads, 2 down and 2 above. This was a 2-story building, and this was all in charge of a sergeant. And
well, the air conditioning must have been really, helpful, right?
no air conditioning. No, it was unheard of in those days.
So tell us about your drill sergeant.
Well, we had a barracks sergeant who was named Lott. He was from Alabama. And I could tell you stories about him here, but I won't. And then there was a drill sergeant. And the drill sergeant was appropriately stern and very interested in discipline. He had one of those voices worn rough by use, and he really was a hard-driving guy, and he would brook no mischief under him. And he was I came to fear him. I really feared him. I figured this guy was made of different material than the average man. But he taught us a lot, and I had an experience after the war about him. Shall I tell you now?
Sure, sure.
Well, I wound up in Nashville, Tennessee eventually, and I bought a car, and I decided that I needed new tires. So I went to the general tire store, and they said, "Oh yeah, we'll give you some tires, and would you wait here and we'll call a salesman to talk to." This is a big place. So I sat in this room and twiddled my thumbs for a while, and then I heard the voice. I thought to myself, "My God, could it be he?" And I got up and I peeked around the corner, and these guys were talking to each other in this conference room. And I asked him if he was who he was. He says, "Yes." And then I told him who I was. And he welcomed me with open arms and great cordiality and hospitality. And he told me in no uncertain terms how glad he was to see that I made it through the war, you know.
Yeah.
Especially when I told him, you know, where I was and what I did. So when he heard that I was there for a set of tires, he sold them to me at cost.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that guy.
Yeah.
His name was Sam McDowell.
So you got through basic training, survived the heat and the yelling and the all that stuff. Did you have any inkling about either where you were going or what your position was going to be in the Army at that point?
Not until it happened.
Okay.
At the end of my basic training, I was told where I was going.
So,
and I was given a delay en route to spend some time with my family. And I was ordered to report to the 76th Division in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. So I went and spent some time with my family, and then I went to Chicago and spent a few days and stayed at the YMCA there and bummed around a little bit. And a GI couldn't buy a meal or a ticket on a streetcar or anything. That was the most hospitable town I was ever in. It was a great serviceman's town.
So if you were in uniform, you were treated very well.
I was, yes.
Yeah. So once your visit with your family is over with, you're now reported in, what happens?
Well, I reported to my unit, and they started telling me that we were going to go on maneuvers pretty soon. The division was a training division. It was a cadre division. They took groups of men and molded them into soldiers and then sent them to various units overseas. But they had just received orders to build up to combat strength, and we were going to go over as a division. And so this was the purpose of us being there. By now, it's since September and October and November, and in Wisconsin it gets kind of cold, and we went on maneuvers in some very, very cold weather. You know, we went up to Watersmeet in Michigan, and all around the Upper Peninsula there, and so by the time we went overseas, I'd had some suitable hot weather training and followed by some cold weather training. Yeah. And so they still wouldn't tell us. They wouldn't tell us until almost the last minute where we were going.
So what happened on that day? How'd they tell you, and where'd you go?
Well, they told us we were going to Europe. And just where, even they didn't know at this point. But then they started issuing us some more equipment to prepare us for that. Now there was a shortage of the new. They had developed a new combat boot by then, with a little gauntlet that went up the leg and had a couple of buckles. Until then, they used what they called service shoes, which came up to the ankle bone, and then had leggings. So since there was a shortage of everything, they gave us each a new pair of combat boots and a pair of service shoes and leggings to carry in our gear. We were wearing winter uniforms, and so when they didn't take that away from us, we knew that we were going into a place where the climate was similar to us.
Now you're a private at this time.
I was a private first class.
Yeah. And did you have a specialty in terms of your role? I mean, some of them carried BARs, for example. Yeah. They were radio men or whatever. What was your? Did you have a specialty?
Well, I was a rifleman. That was my thing. That I carried a rifle. And while I was in the division and training, I was selected to be a first scout in a rifle squad. They observed in me something that told them that I might make a good first scout. And so that's what I was for the rest of my combat experience.
So let's now move on to...
Now, the first scout, by the way, has a very interesting job.
Okay.
When you are approaching a strange town that you intend to capture, the first scout goes in first, and the rest of the squad follows him. And there is a second scout, and he observes what goes on in the trees and in the upper stories of buildings. The first scout observes ahead of him on the ground, and they cooperate in that way, and they pass signals back to the rest of the company.
Wow. Where did you go from there? Did you go to Europe?
We went to Europe, and so we figured we were going to get into the action.
Where did you leave from?
Where did I leave from?
From, yeah.
Camp Miles Standish
Okay.
in Boston.
And then troop transport, or?
We took a special troop transport through the country. We moved only at night for security reasons. This was a big move.
Yeah.
And we went seemingly on lesser important railways. Maybe security was the reason for that, I don't know. But they also had, we went in specially built railway cars that were made especially to move troops. And so we arrived at Camp Miles Standish a few days before Thanksgiving of 1944.
Okay.
I graduated from high school in January '44, went right into the thing, and then spent the rest of that year training.
So this is a ship, was a Liberty ship, or what kind of a ship was it that went over?
I don't know what you call it. It was something like 230 feet long. It was called the SS Sea Owl, and it was manned by Polish people. It was one of that vast cooperation between the nations of the world.
Right.
And we went over in a convoy of 42 ships.
Wow. Was it an uneventful trip or anything?
There's a lot of stories connected with that. Oh, yes. We were in this convoy, and all the way across the Atlantic, we were being approached by German submarines. We dropped a lot of depth charges, especially going into the English Channel. And there was the usual scene with the people throwing up and everything like that, and some of the food was spoiled, and we had salt water to bathe with, so that this required a special kind of soap. And we slept on racks that were 6 high, and I happened to be in the top one, right up next to the bulkhead, which saved me from doing KP and stuff that sometimes, because they couldn't find me. And we set sail on Thanksgiving Day. And it so happened that they gave us a big turkey dinner before we left on the dock. And then after we got on the boat, they gave us another one. So we had plenty to eat. And the Red Cross was there, and they gave us a little cloth bag with a drawstring that had some sundries that they thought we could use on the trip. A couple of packs of cigarettes, some toilet paper, a book to read, a paperback book, a razor and some soap, and some of that special shower soap, and so forth. That book kept me going all the way across the Atlantic. It was Dracula by Bram Stoker.
So where did you arrive?
Well, we thought we were going to France, but halfway across the Atlantic, the orders were changed, and they sent us to England for further training. So we arrived at a channel port, Portsmouth, And from there, again at night, we were moved to Bournemouth, which is a resort town on the Channel. And of course, we stayed in hotels. The place was full of hotels, you know, tourist hotels.
Did you begin training there?
Yeah, we did some further training on the beaches.
Ah.
Hand-to-hand combat. Also, a lot of vets who had been in the action would come and speak to us about what to look forward to. But there's a special story connected with that.
Let's hear it.
As I told you, was a musician. When I was in basic training, I had my parents send me my saxophone so that I could practice in my off-duty hours. I would find a building somewhere and get permission to practice in it. And so when I moved to the division, I took that along with me, and our regiment had a dance band, which of course was strictly on our own time. It wasn't part of the Army table of organization. And we used to play for club dances, officers' clubs and NCO clubs. The NCO clubs would pay us $2.50 a piece to play for a dance, and the officers' clubs would pay us $5 when we played for them. And I got a chance to do what I was interested in doing. So when we got to Bournemouth, they told us we'd be there for a month. And they told us that they wanted to reorganize the regimental dance band. They packed up our instruments and shipped them across the ocean with us. And it was they were held at a special services office. So they broke them out again. We reorganized the band, and we were assigned to service company during the day for rehearsals. So we'd get up in the morning before dawn. We'd fall out on the street, and they'd read all our names out, taking roll, and then everybody would march off to these special classes they were having on the beaches. But the dance band went to service company to rehearse to playing dances. So we played 30 solid days, 30 solid nights, I should say, for the troops who were stationed in the various towns around the periphery. And so that's all we did was play. I was happy as a pig in the mud, you know. I missed out on the hand-to-hand training on the beaches, but I didn't care, you know. So sometime during that period, they came to me and asked me if I wanted to be a sergeant. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, you'll be assigned to a company, and you'll train with them and all that stuff. And I says, does that mean I can't be in the band anymore? And they said, yes. I said, no thanks. It was more important to me, because I was planning to get out of the Army as soon as I possibly could, and so I didn't want to make a career of it necessarily. And so I think I'll just take care of myself, thank you. So I continued being a PFC.
How many people were in the band?
13.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is like Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey kind of big band sound.
We played a different place every night, and the GIs, of course, would come dancing with the English girls.
So, what happened next? What was the next major shift in your life? Were you sent somewhere beside? I mean, you leave Bournemouth?
Well, I was so happy to be in England because this is the land of my blood, and I had a grandmother and some uncles and aunts and cousins living in Plymouth, which also was on the south coast. So I said, I want to go see them. And you could only go alone if you had special permission from your chaplain. They would take groups occasionally of GIs to London and give them a little tourist look at the place. but you couldn't go aside from a group unless you had blood relatives in England. And so when I proved that, then off I went on a train to Plymouth. And there's a story there. I got on the train and we went along for a while, and this very, very British, very tweedy couple got on board. And they were going to Axminster, which is a famous carpet-making town on the coast. And he had knickerbockers, you know, had the tweeds, the whole 9 yards, and she was suitably dowdy looking and everything, and didn't speak unless spoken to. And you recall that in the English trains there are compartments for 6 people. And on the other side of the compartment was 3 British sailors, a chief petty officer and 2 seamen. They were friendly enough, but they didn't say much to me. They didn't trust me, and I didn't trust them either, because we were under special orders to keep our mouths shut because of security considerations. I had to remove all my unit designations on my uniforms and empty my wallet of anything that would tip any spies off to who we were and what was our unit. It was very, very difficult at that time. So these 2 people started delving into my personal history, and I thought they were being a little nosy, you know. So I answered in whatever way I could while still being polite, and the other guys on the other side just didn't say anything. So they were very gabby, and they invited me to come visit them at Axminster if I ever got a chance, or after the war. And I said, thank you, I'll take you up on your offer. So when they got to Axminster, they got off. And the sailors said, oh my God, I thought they would never shut up. And they loosened their ties and everything and sat back and says, are you hungry, Yank? I said, yeah. So they broke out these sandwiches and tea and everything, and we had a nice time for the rest of the trip.
So,
so
where
now,
were you?
You asked me where we're going to go next?
Yeah.
Well, the time came to go across the channel.
Okay.
So they packed up the instruments again, and I reverted to being a rifleman and a first scout. We got on these ships and went across the channel and landed at Le Havre, or which some people call Le Havre or Le Havre. And this was a mess. The Germans left that, and we did too. They left that place in ruins. It was just awful.
So you're arriving in a place that's not a battle zone, it's where a battle had taken place.
Correct.
So what did you see?
I saw devastations everywhere. I saw buildings that were reduced literally just to rubble. And I saw places that I couldn't identify as to what their original purpose was. And we were all awed quite a bit. We started out marching, and we started marching into the inner part of France. The battle by this time had moved eastward toward Germany, and we were going to join in to that. And for a while we were put on trucks and moved. When they could get trucks, they would get them, and we could move a little faster. And at night we tented out on the ground. And
This is pup tents.
Yep.
2 to a tent?
2 to a tent.
Yeah.
And it was a driving blizzard through much of it. It was a record-breaking winter that year. It was just awful. Very, very cold, and lots of snow.
Were you prepared in terms of your clothing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you carrying, by the way, as you're walking? I mean, obviously a rifle and a pack and canteen. Well, how many pounds are we talking about here? Probably 60?
25 pounds.
Oh, 25,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And rations?
rations.
Canned rations or
K rations.
K rations, yeah.
They look like a building brick,
Yeah.
about like that size. And each man got 3 of those a day.
So, did you know the purpose of your mission? Did you know where you were going as you were marching?
Yes.
Where were you going?
We were heading toward the Bulge.
Ah.
That started in near December of that year, and we shipped over in January.
Okay.
Early January.
So the Battle of the Bulge, the infamous Battle of the Bulge, is going on.
Yeah.
Did you know very much about the devastation of that battle?
Yes. Yeah. They tried to tell us as much as they could about it, and we were going to be involved in pushing it back. We weren't in on the siege or anything like that, but we were going to help them push the Germans back and defeat them. The Germans had made quite a bit of inroads into our line, and they were being held there until outfits like ours could get there and start pushing it back.
So, when did you first arrive on the scene, so to speak?
Well, we were put on what was called the quiet front. Our job was just to hold them there, and while we got organized for the push, and we were on the, I think it was I can't remember the name of the river that we were on,
that's
but
right.
the Germans were on the other side.
Okay.
And every once in a while, they'd throw some shells over at us, just to let us know that they were still there. And then we'd answer with some shells of our own. And so you never could tell when they were coming in. And we dug deep pits to stay in at night. And we had about 4 or 5 guys in each one.
This is in the snow and then into the ground?
Yes.
All right.
And we cut some trees and put some logs over the top of us for protection against shelling. And we lived in that way, and we were commanded not to start any fires. So no matter how cold we got, we weren't allowed to toast our toes, because that would give away our positions. Yeah. Or they would see the smoke, you know. So
you're living in your clothes.
Living
and your boots.
Literally.
Okay.
Yes. And we kept our clothes on at all times. Now, at night, when we go into those pits, since it was closed in and since we had more than 2 or 3 guys in there, we managed to keep the place kind of warm. And we would slip our shoes and socks off at night to let everything thaw out a little bit.
The biggest danger when you're not in combat was frostbite.
Definitely.
Was it during this period of time that this occurred, or was it later on that you had the danger of frostbite?
It was toward the end of this period that I got frostbite, and a lot of other guys did too. Yeah. And they moved us up to Luxembourg.
I don't want to jump ahead too quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
All right.
So you're in these holes. In the morning, you're basically watching guard and making sure you don't get hit by a shell. What happens next?
Well, we were issued camouflage clothing. We had a two-piece suit that we put on over our uniform. It was completely white. And that was so we could get lost in the snow visually. And then we had to pull guard at some forward observation posts. And I took my turn. They moved me at night to this one place on a promontory overlooking the German camps. And I had to stay in there in a small lean-to made out of a shelter half all day long, and out of sight of the Germans. And my job was to observe if they did anything different, you know. Our job was to see that they stayed where they were, at least, and to observe them if they moved.
Did you have a radio?
Nope.
How did you communicate then?
Well, I don't know how I would have done it. Nothing happened, fortunately. but I would have had to start shooting if they found me or if they got too close to me. And of course, we had some signals set up so that when they'd hear me down the line, they'd know I was in trouble. I had a tin can from one of the rations, and that's what I urinated into, and I would move it out of the tent, set it in a little bush, and the Germans would come up a trail into where I was looking for firewood, and sometimes they got pretty close that way. And
but you were not to shoot. You were just there to observe.
Shoot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened next? What after that? Where did you go?
Well, they started moving toward Luxembourg, which was just a short way away on the Sauer River, and to a town called Echternach. And we got ready to jump across the Saar into combat. And that's when I started getting frostbite, and everybody else did too. So the 417th Regiment was assigned the job of establishing a bridge across the river. Of course, all the real bridges had been blown by then, and they were assigned the job of putting up a pontoon bridge across this river. And up in the town of Echternach, those of us who had frostbite were being feverishly treated by medics, and they had us rubbing our feet and bathing them in warm water and just keep doing that, you know, trying to keep the blood flowing in our. And the people who really got gangrene were shipped to the rear to have toes and feet chopped off. And I was in the 385th Regiment, and there was another regiment up the hill, the 304th, and we were in support of the 417th, which was attempting to make the crossing. Well, I told you about the record-breaking cold, and it was starting to become spring, and some of the snows had thawed up in the mountains and was flowing down in the form of water. So this Saar River had overflowed its banks, and it became about twice as wide, and it became very fast. The water was flowing past at great speed. And this made it rather difficult to set up a pontoon bridge, because no sooner would they get a unit installed and so forth, that the water would wash it away. And besides all that, on the other side were the Germans, and they were firing on us and shelling us. The 417th eventually got across the river, but they had 80% casualties, and it never got to be a healthy regiment again. You know, they lost all of their important people. Now, casualties, I'm talking about they were killed or wounded, you know, one way or the other. And of course, the Germans, they liked the idea of wounding us because that meant they had to tie up some other guys taking care of them.
Yeah.
So on the other side there was a slope, a long slope, going up to where they were, and that's began the Siegfried Line, which is made of tank traps and so forth. And beyond that is pillboxes in quite some depth. So we had a lot ahead of us. So as soon, and the 417th finally made the crossing, and then we poured over. Well, my frostbite had been taken care of enough for me to stay in the unit. So I immediately went across the river with these on those pontoon bridges.
Were you being shot at?
Oh yes, oh yes, very much so.
So are we looking at, I know what a pontoon bridge is, so you're looking at a whole line of GIs running across this thing as shells are going off and guys are getting picked off and...
Well, occasionally you'd have to jump over a dead body to go where you're going, and this was a very narrow thing.
So you made it to the other side.
We made it to the other side.
You regrouped?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your immediate objective then, once you got across?
Well, we had to go through the Siegfried Line, and there were demolition experts there to blow up some of these tank traps so that we could form an avenue through for our vehicles and stuff.
Are we talking about a day or a couple of days or 3 or 4 days before
3 or
you got
4.
to the Siegfried Line?
Yeah. Well, this line was a whole bunch of pyramidal shaped reinforced concrete, and they were all, I'd say, 4.5 feet tall, each of them, and they were designed to frustrate any tanks from getting through, so that we wouldn't have the use of our armor. And so we had to go, as I say, form this swath through there. Well, we not only did that, but we turned around and we went back through and back again. So we went through it 3 times, and made plenty of room for the armor to go through.
First of all, how was the armor getting across? After the pontoon bridge, they had finally built a regular bridge so that they could get the armor across?
They went across on the pontoon bridges.
Wow.
The pontoon bridge was made by putting a whole bunch of, well, they look like barges or boats, and they laid them side by side across the river, and then 2 tracks on top of that. And they were designed so that the tanks and the trucks would fit in those tracks. And it's kind of a precarious way to cross any river, especially one that was going how many miles an hour.
Sure. So inside the Siegfried Line, you say you crossed in and out, in and out. I'm assuming that this is under fire. This is,
yes.
You're literally, what was the terrain like in that particular area?
It was very, very bumpy and hilly and uneven. We were going uphill to begin with. Then we got onto more or less level territory, but there was quite a long slope going down to the riverbank.
And there were nests of machine guns or soldiers. I mean, what were you up against?
There were machine gun nests all along there, and of course there were artillery pieces, and they were shelling us with whatever they could. Mortars are the terrible things because you can't hear them coming. You're walking along and boom, you've got it. They didn't make a whistling noise when they came in, as the artillery did.
So as the first scout, was your job to go out ahead and see where they were and get shot at and run back and say, that's where they are?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, that's right. It was such a maelstrom of confusion, you know, at all times that I have no clear memory of the sequence of events. I just knew that it was kind of rough at the time.
You know, Harold Falkema, who I interviewed, who not only survived D-Day, but survived the Battle of the Bulge, he described the Battle of the Bulge this way. He says, I don't know when it started or when it ended, they just kept shooting at us.
Yes, that's about it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, even the officers didn't know fully what was happening.
Yeah.
And certainly we didn't. We were just PFCs, and we were just supposed to follow orders. And somebody told me to go over there and shoot that guy. I said, yes, sir. So I go and shoot them. The officers had the benefit of maps in some cases. We didn't even have that.
The casualty rate was, in your particular group, was it fairly high?
Yeah. From the time we went overseas at Camp Miles Standish until Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, which was a space of what, from January to May, we had 9 different company commanders. It'll give you an idea of our casualties. Now, again, the casualties, they weren't all killed and they weren't all wounded. Some of them were bumped up to take the place of somebody else who was wounded and so forth. But we kept getting new officers all the time. The
Siegfried Line was eventually overrun.
Yes.
Where'd you go from there?
Well, immediately was an in-depth maze of pillboxes. Now the pillboxes were constructed to cover certain areas of terrain, and they were built in such a way so that one pillbox could cover each other, and they had the thing triangulated so that you always were under fire from one of them at least.
And this is reinforced concrete?
6 to 8 feet of reinforced concrete, yeah.
Machine guns sticking out of a visual area that's
Yeah.
and their basic job is to mow down anybody that gets in their sights.
Definitely, yeah.
So how do you take out one of those things?
Well, that's hard to say. We didn't have any artillery that could pierce that stuff. And so we had to take it sometimes with our bare hands. We had flamethrowers. Mm-hmm. But the problem there was to get the flamethrowers up there, yeah. Or you had to be right there with a flamethrower. You had to be up to one of those embrasures and spray the inside with terrible way to die, by the way. But we used various techniques to do that. Now, as time went on, they developed a new artillery piece that they installed on a half-tank, on a tank, and they had an unusually fast muzzle speed, 14,000 feet per second. And they could knock a hole in one of those. But until that time, it was very difficult to take any pillbox. We would fire 105 millimeter shells at them, and it would just sort of bounce off like that.
So let's take a look at one of these pillboxes then. You've got a whole group of Americans on the ground, because you're not going to stand up to get shot down, and you're crawling towards the pillbox?
Yeah.
Yeah. In patrols and just randomly people just trying to get there without getting their head shot off?
Well, we were told where they were, and including how to get there, but once there we had to stay pretty close to the ground because the trajectory of we were on the attack one day. We crossed a little stream from one of the pillboxes that we had captured, and we went toward the next several pillboxes. And my squad was pinned down. We were pinned down. We couldn't move between two pillboxes or in the line of sight of these two. And if you lifted your butt or something like that, you'd get a bullet going right by you, and you didn't dare. I was pinned down. Mm-hmm. And it was cold and it was muddy and everything like that, and I had to urinate. And there was no way to urinate or no place to go, so I just would do it right in my uniform, you know. That was the only way to do it.
How did you get out of that?
You did what you had to do.
Well, sure. How did you get out of that particular situation?
Well, we got out of it with a Silver Star. There was a guy from New Jersey. He was a Frank Sinatra fan, and he was singing all day when we were on the move. He wanted to be Frank Sinatra. And he was the BAR man. And his name was Vinny Lamberto. And we were trying to get close to these pillboxes and not having much success. And the Germans were throwing insults at us through the openings and laughing and mocking us. And it was pretty frustrating. And Vinny all of a sudden jumped up and started screaming, and he ran toward this pillbox. His mind snapped. He decided something's got to be done, and I have to do it. So the rest of us saw what he had done, and so everybody concentrated their fire on that pillbox to cover him until he got there, because he was going to go there with his BAR. Well, he did. He went to it, and he stuck the BAR, and he sprayed the inside with bullets, and they surrendered. And after the operation was over, we went back to the pillbox that we had started from, and all of a sudden, Vinny realized what he'd done, and he cracked. He just sat on the floor with his back against the wall and stared out into space, and he wouldn't eat or drink or anything. He was shocked. So they had to take him back to the rear. They gave him a Silver Star. Things like that happened all the time, you know.
So where did you go from there? This is spring is here though, right? Spring is
yeah.
It's getting warmer. It's
getting warmer, muddier, and a little less cold. And we started going town by town and village by village, and long marches through country roads and stuff like that.
Was this, the marches, for example, give us an idea of the depth of this. You're talking about soldiers spread out along a field, just thousands of them marching across, and you're looking across and you're just seeing line after line of GIs walking just like you are.
Yeah. Well, we had to keep at certain intervals. We didn't want to bunch up.
Yeah.
Because then we'd be good targets.
Sure.
So it was usually a column of twos on one side and the other of a road, just moving until somebody pinned us down or we got to a place that we were supposed to capture.
Were there tanks, jeeps, mechanized armor?
The armor was behind us. So,
Okay.
well, I'll tell you what, the armor usually went first.
Okay.
And they would engage the German armor, and they'd have a big scrap, and they'd move on. And when we got there, which was a little later, the Germans was already back in the town, ready for us. But at least we didn't have to deal with their armor because
Right.
we had knocked them out.
Right.
So what we saw was devastation and ruined vehicles and bodies and everything. It was
Snipers?
Just, yes. Oh, yes.
So as your position as the first scout, you would come upon a town,
Mm-hmm.
and there's perhaps smoke going off in the distance and whatnot. The tanks had just been through.
Mm-hmm.
You're then what? You go to the town to check it out. You're getting shot at,
Yeah.
and then you run back and say, they're shooting at us. there's somebody there.
Well, the Germans liked to let me and the second scout through first and jump on the guys in the rear of the column. And so sometimes I found myself cut off and I'd have to get my way back, but that wasn't always. Now, things had started to turn around. Just had started. The Germans were realizing that they were losing this thing. And they had a lot of desertions and a lot of people surrendering who had been ordered not to. And it was a mess. And they were losing their officer corps too. The difference between us and them, though, was that if they didn't have an officer to tell them what to do, they didn't know what to do. They were strictly taught to follow orders, and we were taught to improvise. Yeah. And so when push came to shove, we would take the initiative individually, and they couldn't do that. And they were always they were always trying to kill our officers because they assumed that we were the same way, see? And that wasn't necessarily true.
Yeah.
And that was the interesting part of the war to me.
Now, you're going over terrain, you're going into a town. Mm-hmm. It's basically, I mean, obviously each one was different, but it was a similar pattern, right? That the armor would come through, engage the armor, you'd come in, they'd try to trap you.
Yeah.
You would take over the town and
Yeah.
either take surrender or, take it over by force. Once the town was taken, once the prisoners were gathered up, did somebody come and get the prisoners and take them away?
Yes.
Okay. All
They
right.
had compounds set up in the rear. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yep. He just destroyed his eardrum, but no, I'm just
Yes.
kidding, just kidding.
Yeah, they had compounds set up in the rear to receive these prisoners,
Okay.
which started growing by the month,
What about, I've obviously read about this, I don't know for a fact, but the age of the people who were surrendering, were they all in the same age group as you, or did you notice anything different as each town was taken?
Well, as things got a little bit more desperate for them, they started bringing people in who wouldn't be called up in our situation. We were in a village one time, and I saw a little farm building off by itself, and there was nobody around it. And I started walking toward it to check it out. And the door slowly opened, and I jumped behind a tree, and it was a German machine gun nest. And they were waiting in there for us to show up so they could surrender. And the ammunition bearer was a 14-year-old. They were bringing these kids in all the time to do stuff like that, menial tasks. And he was wearing an adult-sized uniform, you know, and he's scared stiff. Yeah. And his job was to carry the ammunition for the machine gun. And they all surrendered. The sergeant decided to surrender his team. And you saw all kinds of that sort of thing in those days.
What about older men?
Older men too.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was an organization called the Volkssturm. They were regularly organized guys who normally wouldn't be fit for combat, and they came into being. They came into evidence pretty much toward the ends of things when they were serving as defense, defending these towns. So there were all kinds. I have a knife at home that I took from a Volkssturm soldier who was manning a pillbox. Yeah, everybody was in this scrap. You know, the women were certainly involved.
Really? I've never heard that before.
Not in an active way
Right.
so much, but as a support and supply and
Sure.
nurturing capacity.
So you felt that things were winding down. You could tell as you moved from town to town that was the resistance less, certainly less than the Battle of the Bulge or any of those kind of battles.
It was sporadic.
Okay, all right.
There were, if you came to a town defended by SS, for example, the Schutzstaffel, you had a fight on your hands because they were really frantically loyal to the Führer, and we'd have a fight on our hands. We captured one town that was defended by a German parachute company, and they were elite troops, and they fought, and we lost some good men there.
Those groups, I take it, didn't surrender.
They didn't surrender, no. Yeah. Or they wouldn't unless it really was it was over for them. But some of them fought right to the death. But then other places, you know, they were just ordinary folks, you know, and they would surrender much more easily, or flee to the next town and leave the town open for us.
That happened too. You just walk in and everybody's gone.
Walk in and you could see the white flags popping out of all the windows.
Wow.
as you got closer. And the mayor would meet you and surrender all the weapons they could wind up, because our first instruction was, we want all your firearms, and we want them brought here, and every last one of them. And there'll be consequences if they're not, you know.
Yeah. So after this march through, where did you go next? I mean, what was the next major event that happened after the town to town to town? And
we did that right up to the end of the war. We just kept doing the same thing.
Did you march into Germany?
Oh, yes.
Well, tell us about that.
Well, from the time we crossed the Sauer River, we were in Germany.
Already in Germany.
That was Germany. That became eventually part of the Russian zone of occupation.
Okay.
And there's a story connected with that.
Well, let's go into that then.
No, we got into the depths of Germany, and lots of rural farm-type communities. And the civilians were much more docile and cooperative there because they didn't want war. They wanted to farm, you know. They weren't interested in all of this conflict. They weren't political. Yeah. And so when the SS troops left town and the really serious defenders, the civilians were prepared to give up. So sometimes it was easy, and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes you had a fierce firefight on your hands, and sometimes you didn't. But you never knew what to expect, you know.
Right. Where did it all, I don't want to say end, but where did it all wind down?
Well, we, at the end of the war, we were very near the Czechoslovak border. And we were told that eventually we were going to meet the Russians who were coming the other way. We had them in a big... So we all built foxholes, dug foxholes, and stood fast waiting for this to happen. And so eventually the Russians did show up. And they had, some of them had their wives with them, some had mistresses, they had cattle, and they were singing and dancing all the time and drinking their heads off. It was quite a scene. It was a rather undisciplined group. And the first thing they wanted to do was to trade weapons with us, you know, and maybe cigarettes and things like that, and food. So it was quite an experience meeting the Russians.
So there was no like barbed wire between you or anything. It was just open field, and they just suddenly showed up, or how did that happen?
Well, we could see them approaching in the distance.
Okay.
You know, they had a few vehicles that they'd commandeered from the civilians. You know, they lived off the land.
Yeah.
They didn't depend on their supply to keep them eating or drinking or anything. They just took what they wanted to from the Germans, without regard about the Germans' welfare at all.
Yeah. So you meet up there, and what happens next?
Well, we had instructions from on high that when the major powers met at Yalta, they decided that once the war was won, and it looked as if it would be, they were going to divide the country into occupation areas. There was an American zone and a French zone and an English zone and a Russian zone. And they were usually located in such a way that they were adjacent to those countries. And we were told that the land that we had just taken, we were going to yield to the Russians, who would form the occupying force. Well, we didn't like that idea so much because we paid for that with our blood, literally.
Yeah.
And so after the war was over, that we moved back, and the Russians came in and occupied. So we moved back a certain distance, and then later on, even after I left them, they moved back some more, and the Russians moved in some more.
How'd you hear about the war ending?
It was word of mouth. The platoon runner would come around and say, it's all going to end day after tomorrow, and we have to be prepared to receive some people coming in for surrender. Because the first thing that the Germans did was they tried to surrender to us so that they wouldn't have to surrender to the Russians. The Russians treated them miserably. The Russians were very vindictive about what the Germans had done to them in their turn. And they were going to get back at the Germans. So when the Russian army came in, man, they pillaged and raped and everything you could imagine they did. And so we had hundreds of Germans coming over to our line to surrender to us. And our instructions were to turn them around and send them back. We couldn't accept their surrender. And there was quite a bit of conflict there.
The Germans begging to be...
Begging to surrender to us. They knew that we were a lot more humane, you know, than the Russians were.
So when did it end for you?
Well, I'm standing in a foxhole, water up to my calves, waiting for all this to happen. And VE Day came. And the runner came around and said, they're reorganizing the regimental dance band. When? Now. Says, you're ordered to report to service company in the rear, and they're going to give you your instruments back, and you're going to play, see? Well, we didn't talk at all about crossing the Rhine. That was another story. They came around and asked if there was anybody having eye trouble. And I said, yes, I'm having eye trouble. I can't see through my sights anymore. So they said, well, come with me. And they took me in a quarter-ton truck to the rear to a hospital. And they kept me there for a week. They gave me a GI set of pajamas, took my rifle away from me and all my other stuff, and just made me sit there for a week. At the end of the week, they gave me eye tests, and they found out my eyes were okay. What I had was combat fatigue, you know, from all of that going without sleep. We were deprived of sleep and decent food the whole time we were doing this. And there were all these little mini dramas that were happening along the way, during which time we had to go without sleep for long periods of time, and we were getting really punchy from it. So anyway, my eyes were bad, and they sent me back to the rear, and they decided I was okay, so they sent me back to my outfit just in time for them to make the Rhine crossing, which I was raising quite a fuss at the hospital because I wanted to rejoin my group. Well, during that time, they asked me again if I wanted to be a sergeant. And I asked the same question. And they said, no, you're going to have to leave the band. And I said, no, thanks. So when I came out of the Army, I was still a PFC, and I didn't care. Yeah. But on the other hand, I'd had a lot of experience in my soon-to-be chosen profession because I did that. Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get back to your getting out of the military, you said about crossing the Rhine. This, I take it, was a pretty bloody battle.
Yeah, it was. They made a crossing north of us, and they got a whole lot of vehicles and men across the river. And before that bridge at Remagen collapsed into the river. And from that point, we had to build our own bridges again. And we crossed on one of those pontoon bridges. So
being shot at, and, as you described before.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're standing in a foxhole, you've got all this water, and they tell you that they're putting the band together, and
yeah.
So what'd you do?
Well, they sent around a truck for us, and we went back to the rear, excuse me, and joined service company, and all we did with them was eat and sleep.
And shower.
And shower, yeah. Well, by the way, we had 2 showers during combat.
Oh my God.
1 a month. And that was an interesting experience too. And
that's the bucket up above and...
Well, not exactly that primitive. They had a portable shower unit that moved with a series of vehicles and everything. And they had heaters for the water and everything like that. And it was... I could keep you here another hour or 2. Well, anyway, every day we went around. We were all on occupation duty now. The shooting was over, and we were on occupation. And we were trying to handle these problems of reestablish some political order in these towns, and round up any holdout Nazis that might be hiding from us and all that, and trying to restore the services to these towns, the water and everything else. And so there were, the different members of the division were stationed in these villages and towns all around, and we went around and entertained them. Mm-hmm. That's what we did every day. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of dusty, warm trips on trucks, and we'd go out and play for the soldiers, and sometimes for the civilians. Mm-hmm. There were little clots of civilians that were caught and stranded there. Some of them were people who were brought there from their countries to be slave laborers for the Nazis. And they were stuck until we could find a way to get them back home. And so they were always part of our audiences too. And we had some very touching moments with that, you know. And so that's what we did until a certain point where they decided they were going to disband the division. And in those days, you had a point system set up to see who was going to be discharged first. It took 85 points, I think, to get out. And I had 42, so I had to stay a little longer than some people did. So they were sending us to, they were going to send us to France to be reassigned. Well, I caught on with a traveling show, a soldier show. And I started touring Europe on a regular circuit as a member of the band. And from that point forward, I never pulled KP again or stood in inspection. All I did was play. Wow. So that, I figured Uncle Sam was paying me back.
So when did you finally get discharged?
I got discharged in well, I stayed another year.
Oh, okay.
Accumulating those points. And so a year later, in May, I came home for discharge. And let's see, I got, the war was over May the 8th.
In Europe, or are you talking about VJ Day too?
In Europe.
Oh, okay.
And then later on, in August, the war ended in the Pacific.
Right.
Well, I left the division. They sent me to a replacement depot in France, in Compiègne, France. And the idea was they were going to ship me to the Pacific to help them finish the war there. And I said, well, I'm not interested in doing that. I've had my share, you know. Yeah. Is there some way I can get out of this, you know? I had 3 battle stars and some other ribbons too. And so I was in this replacement depot near Compiègne. That's the site of the signing of the armistice after First World War. They had the railroad car there. And let's see, how was it? Oh yeah, we were in a tent city that was set up for these people who were moving through, and it was out in the countryside, and I had my tenor sax with me. And the idea was they were going to redeploy me and send me to the Pacific. And so a band came into the tent city from Compiègne. It was a Dixieland band. It was a 7-piece band. And they were pretty good. And I went up there and listened to them, and I said, can I sit in with you? And they said, yeah, bring your horn. So I played with them for a couple, 3 hours, and they were really kind of welcoming, you know. They thought it was pretty good. They did all right. So I told them what I was interested in doing. I want to hook on with a musical group and stay in Europe if I can until I have to discharge. So an army band came through and they played for them. and I auditioned with them. And then every day they started announcing people to get on a ship to go back. And so I would fall out in the morning and listen for my name to be called, and I never heard it. And 1s and 2s and 3s would leave and go to the coast to get on a ship. And they never called my name. And finally, I went to the headquarters tent, and I says, I'm about the only guy that's here left. I says, my name hasn't been called. And they said, oh, well, let me check your records. And they found a piece of paper, and they said, oh, here you are. They cut separate orders on you. You're going to join that Dixieland band and go up here. And that was something. I got a professional challenge out of it.
Wow.
And I got left in France. And then they were going to break up that replacement depot eventually. So I said, well, I better hook on with somebody else. And I joined a traveling soldier show. And we went around Europe. And I stayed that way until it was time for me to go home. And I had a good bit of training there.
Sounds good. Well, we could spend a lot more time on this, and fortunately, if I've been able to convince you to get more involved with the museum, we'll get more of those stories down.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to...
This has been a kind of a disjointed time, but I've got stories.
I believe that. Ray, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. This has been great.